So in this video I am going to explain the plasma membrane and essentially the models of the plasma membrane and what it does. So first of all cells have plasma membranes. And essentially it's a bilayer. As you can see, there are heads. Phospholipids make up the bilayer. And each one of these things is called a phospholipid. And it has a hydrophilic head, which means that it likes water, so it will come into contact with the environment and the water. And then here is a hydrophobic tail. And so essentially the plasma membrane, what it does is it separates the cytoplasm from the external environment of the cell. So it separates the intracellular fluid, which is commonly known as ICF, from the ECF, which is extracellular fluid, the stuff located outside of the cell. And so as you can see, it makes a sandwich type of structure, and this allows, because it's hydrophobic on the inside, fats can pass through the membrane very easily. And fats are hydrophobic. I mean, the tails are hydrophobic, so fats can enter very easily because fats are also hydrophobic, which means water-fearing. And so now let's get into the functions of the cell membrane. I'm going to write out a few, but there's a lot of functions of the cell membrane. So, one, it essentially is the outer boundary. It forms the boundary of the cell, so it's the boundary. Of cell. And then two, it provides support, so essentially it's the same as the functions. And then another one is it helps with communication. So essentially the cell membrane has stuff we'll get into that allows other cells to recognize it as being self or foreign, which then also continues to defense. It helps your immune system like recognize bad cells. And then it also helps with chemical reactions. And so just to give you an idea of how important the cell membrane is, the plasma membrane is, 70% of medications affect the membrane, the plasma membrane. And now I'm going to talk about essentially the model of the plasma membrane. So let me erase this. So as you can see, the plasma membrane right here, it essentially consists of three components. The major one I explained earlier were phospholipids. So phospholipids, lipids. And then there are also proteins, which essentially act like channels that allow certain chemicals and things to get into the cell that normally wouldn't be able to get into the cell. And then finally there's cholesterol. And the cholesterol, what it does is it essentially helps maintain the fluidity of the membrane. So it allows a membrane to kind of have flexibility, so to speak. And so also, to come off of proteins, there are two types of proteins, peripheral and integral. So they are different in that the peripheral proteins are found on the inner membrane surface. So found on the membrane surface. And the integral proteins are completely embedded. So essentially imagine this is the membrane up here. This thing right here is an integral protein, which means it's embedded in the membrane. A peripheral protein would be right here, or let's pretend I'm drawing one right now. A peripheral protein could be right over there. Essentially, it doesn't go all the way through the membrane. And so to get a good idea of how much phospholipids the membrane is composed of, so 70% is phospholipids, and then cholesterol makes up 20%. And once again, cholesterol, it's really important in that it allows the fluidity of the membrane. So if you increase the temperature, cholesterol can decrease the fluidity because all of the molecules are going to vibrate and try and move apart. If you decrease the temperature, they're going to try to stick together, but cholesterol can increase the fluidity of the membrane to maintain a constant fluidity. And finally, I'm going to talk about the glycocalyx. And what that is, let me clear this. And so imagine the glycocalyx as this. So this is the plasma membrane. And imagine that just goes on. And so the glycocalyx is made up of carbs. We'll use red for carbs. And so some of the proteins, it actually doesn't come off of a phospholipid, sorry. And so some proteins, we'll use blue for a protein, some proteins have a carbohydrate group attached on top, and then many of them added together, like throughout the cell, essentially forms a sugar carb layer on top of the membrane called the glycocalyx. And essentially what the glycocalyx does is it helps with communication and cells recognizing one another. And the carb chain can also fall on top of a lipid as well. So it doesn't only have to be on top of a protein. So there could be carb chains on top of lipids as well.